Two sisters, born under the same roof, yet worlds apart. One ruled with pride and poise, the other fought with heart and hope. Through years of rivalry, heartbreak, and silence, their story became one of the most powerful journeys in Downton Abbey. But behind the camera, something deeper was happening. A real friendship that turned on-screen tension into timeless magic. This is the story of Mary and Edith, told through the voices of the women who brought them to life. Michelle Dockery and Laura Carmichael. From the very first episode, the tension between Lady Mary and Lady Edith wasn't just about jealousy. It was about being seen. Mary, the eldest, was elegant, clever, and confident, the natural heir to the Crawley family's pride. Edith, on the other hand, was the overlooked middle sister, often standing in Mary's shadow, waiting for someone to notice her worth in the grand halls of Downton Abbey. Their rivalry became a mirror of the changing times, to women fighting not only for love and status, but for identity. Michelle Dockery once described Mary as a woman built from steel and silk, someone who carries her pain like a secret crown. Laura Carmichael said Edith's story was one of quiet strength, a woman who had to lose everything before finding herself. And through these performances, we saw something real, not villains and victims, but sisters, flawed and human. As the seasons went on, viewers began to see the cracks in Mary's perfect image. Behind her coldness was grief, fear, and the burden of keeping the Crawley name alive. Edith, meanwhile, grew from insecurity into independence, from heartbreak to happiness. Her story of finding her voice, her career, and her place in the world became one of the most emotional arcs in the entire show. The writers used their differences like threads, weaving conflict, love, and forgiveness into something larger than family drama. Every sharp word between them carried years of pain. Every glance across the dinner table said what they could never speak aloud. "I wish I could be you." Screen. Michelle and Laura often spoke about how natural their chemistry felt, that even when their characters were at war, their real bond made the scenes honest and alive. The way they laughed between takes softened the cruelty of their scripted fights. And that contrast, bitter on screen. Warm behind the camera gave their performances a rare depth that still resonates with fans today. When Downton Abbey ended, audiences didn't just remember the estate, the fashion, or the love stories. They remembered two sisters who started as rivals, but ended as equals. Because beneath all the titles and teacups, Downton Abbey was always about the people who dared to grow, even when it hurt. And no one grew more beautifully than Mary and Edith. It began with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind that lives between two people who have said too much and yet not enough. Mary and Edith weren't just sisters. They were reflections, mirrors showing each other what they feared to see in themselves. In the grand echo of Downton's corridors, their rivalry was never only about love or inheritance. It was about worth. Mary, sharp as crystal, carried the weight of being perfect. Every step she took seemed rehearsed by centuries of expectation. She was born to lead, but forced to prove it every single day. Edith, always the second thought, lived in the shadows of that perfection. Her kindness was quiet, her victories unnoticed, and in her heart, she built herself not from admiration, but from rejection. The early seasons of Downton Abbey painted their relationship, like a cold war, polite smiles at breakfast, venom under the surface. When Mary insulted Edith, it wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was fear disguised as pride. And when Edith struck back, it wasn't bitterness, it was the ache of being invisible. Michelle Dockery once said in an interview, "Mary doesn't hate Edith, she hates what Edith makes her feel," Laura Carmichael replied with a laugh. And Edith doesn't hate Mary, she just wants her to finally see her. That single truth defined their story. As the years went by, time softened their edges. Life handed them both tragedy and tenderness, loss, love, motherhood, and the steady passing of eras. The sisters who once battled for attention began to share quiet respect. They still disagreed, still hurt each other. But something had changed. They had learned that pain, when faced honestly, becomes connection. Behind the camera, the magic deepened. Michelle and Laura's real friendship shaped the rhythm of every scene. They didn't play rivals, they played women learning to forgive. Between takes, they laughed at how serious their arguments looked on screen. Sometimes they'd finish a tense scene and immediately break into giggles, the tension melting in seconds. That bond, genuine and warm, made their performances breathe with authenticity. By the time Downton Abbey, the grand finale, arrived, the transformation was complete. Mary, once guarded, learned vulnerability. Edith, once fragile, learned power. They no longer needed to win, they simply needed to understand. That's what made their final story so moving. It wasn't about who married better or who had more. It was about two sisters who spent a lifetime misunderstanding each other, only to discover in the end they'd been walking the same path all along. And as the camera panned over Downton for the last time, it wasn't just the end of an era, it was forgiveness. Captured in the quiet glance between two women who had finally found peace when the camera stopped rolling, the echo of Downton's grand halls didn't fade, it lingered in laughter, in shared teacups, in the quiet friendship between Michelle Dockery and Laura Carmichael. Behind every sharp glance their characters exchanged on screen, there was warmth waiting just offset. Because once the director called cut, Mary and Edith disappeared, and Michelle and Laura came back, smiling, joking, helping each other fix a crooked collar or a stubborn line of dialogue. Their connection wasn't built overnight. It grew slowly between long filming days and late-night rehearsals, between the weight of corsets and the stillness of tea scenes that took hours to perfect. Laura once shared that during early seasons, she often felt like Edith herself, a bit unsure, surrounded by grandeur. But it was Michelle who made her feel at home. And Michelle said that Laura's gentleness reminded her to find the heart beneath Mary's pride. In that sense, the story behind the scenes became a reflection of the one they acted out. Two women learning to trust, to grow, to see the other not as competition, but as company. Their friendship gave the rivalry realism. It turned simple lines of dialogue into living emotion. When Edith's tears felt genuine, it's because Laura was surrounded by a team that loved her. When Mary's moments of regret looked real, it's because Michelle didn't just act sorrow. She felt it. In the warmth of knowing she wasn't alone in this story, crew members often said that the days filming together felt like family dinners filled with teasing, inside jokes and laughter echoing through marble halls. One moment they were two aristocratic sisters trading cutting remarks. The next, they were giggling over who had forgotten their line. The contrast was beautiful. Cold rivalry on camera and friendship glowing just behind it. That energy touched every frame of Downton Abbey. It gave the series a heartbeat, one that couldn't be scripted. It's what made the audience believe that Mary's regret was real, that Edith's forgiveness mattered. When production finally wrapped on the finale, Michelle and Laura hugged for a long time. They both said it felt like closing a chapter of their own lives. For years, they'd grown up inside those characters, their tears, their triumphs, their silences. And as the lights went out in Downton's drawing room for the last time, the two actresses didn't just say goodbye to their roles. They said goodbye to the women they once pretended to be, and the friendship that helped them both become who they truly are. Endings are rarely quiet, but this one was. When Downton Abbey reached its final chapter, it wasn't just the end of a beloved show. It was the closing of a world, a place built on elegance, secrets, and unspoken love. For Michelle Dockery and Laura Carmichael, that final day on set wasn't scripted. It was lived. They say you could feel it in the air. That strange stillness when everyone knows something precious is about to end. The cast gathered in the grand hall, the chandeliers glowing like they always had, but this time, every light seemed softer. Every laugh carried a trace of goodbye. Michelle looked around the set and said later, "It didn't feel like leaving a show. It felt like leaving home." Laura described the moment as bittersweet, like turning the last page of a story you never wanted to finish. For years, Mary and Edith's story had been built on contrast, pride and patience, silence and fire. But in the finale, something shifted. The bitterness that once separated them faded into understanding. Mary's eyes softened. Edith's smile held no resentment. There was no grand apology, no perfect reunion. Just two women standing side by side. Finally equal, finally seen. The beauty of Downton Abbey's finale was that it didn't chase perfection. It offered peace. Mary, after years of guarding her heart, allowed herself to feel joy without guilt. Edith, once the forgotten sister, stood radiant and fulfilled, not because someone gave her happiness, but because she built it herself. In that quiet symmetry, their stories met, not in rivalry, but in reflection. Behind the scenes, the emotions were real. Michelle and Laura, surrounded by their castmates, struggled to hold back tears. The camera stopped rolling, but no one moved. In later interviews, Michelle said, "Mary and Edith grew up, and so did we." Laura added, "It was strange. You could feel that we were closing a chapter, but it didn't feel sad. It felt complete." As the camera pulled back one final time, showing the golden light of morning spilling over the Downton estate, it wasn't just an ending. It was a whisper that life moves forward, that family heals in its own time, that love, even after years of silence, finds a way to speak. The grand finale wasn't about the glamour or the gowns. It was about the courage to forgive and the quiet grace of letting go. Downton Abbey didn't end in thunder. It ended in peace. And sometimes, that's the most powerful ending of all. Stories fade. But some linger, not because they shout the loudest, but because they whisper the truth. Mary and Edith's story did exactly that. It began as a tale of jealousy and rivalry, yet it ended as something rare, a portrait of forgiveness that felt profoundly human. Years after the credits rolled, audiences still talk about them, not just as characters, but as reflections of themselves. Mary, with her sharp edges and unshakable control, spoke to those who hide their pain behind strength. Edith, with her quiet resilience, became a voice for everyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or misunderstood. Together, they became symbols of growth, proof that love between sisters doesn't have to be perfect to be real, Michelle Dockery once said. "Mary taught me that even the proudest heart can learn to bend," Laura Carmichael added. "And Edith showed me that gentleness isn't weakness, it's power that doesn't need to shout." Those words captured why their bond stayed alive long after Downton Abbey ended. It wasn't about the grandeur of the estate or the drama. Of the Crawley name, it was about the quiet transformation of two women who learned how to love without losing themselves. Fans around the world felt that change deeply. Social media filled with messages like, "I am both Mary and Edith," or "Their story helped me forgive my sister." The legacy stretched beyond the screen into living rooms, friendships, and families who saw pieces of their own history in the Crawley sisters' journey. Even now, when Michelle and Laura reunite for interviews or special features, the connection between them is unmistakable. Their laughter carries the ease of people who have shared something extraordinary, not fame, but understanding. They built a relationship that outlasted the scripts. And in every moment they recall, you can still feel the heartbeat of Downton Abbey, a story that never really ended, only evolved. The legacy of Mary and Edith isn't written in marble or fame, it's written in emotion. It's the look of pride between sisters who once tore each other apart. It's the acceptance that family doesn't always heal neatly. But when it does, it shines brighter for the scars it carries. Downton Abbey gave us elegance, romance, and grandeur. But Mary and Edith gave us something far rarer: truth. And in the quiet corners of that truth, their legacy continues to live. Not in the halls of Downton, but in the hearts of everyone who's ever fought, forgiven, and found love again. The last note of a symphony never truly disappears. It drifts softly through time. And so did Downton Abbey. Even after the screens went dark, the story didn't stop. It lived on in the hearts of those who watched, in the memories of those who made it, and in the silence of that grand old house that seemed to breathe with its own soul. When Michelle, Dockery, and Laura Carmichael walked away from the set for the final time, they weren't just leaving behind costumes and lines. They were leaving a decade of laughter, heartbreak, and transformation. A world that had shaped who they were, both on and off the screen. Michelle once said that when she looked back at the Downton estate, she felt the weight of every story they had told. Laura called it a home made of memories. But perhaps that's the secret of Downton Abbey's lasting magic. It never really said goodbye. It simply stepped back into history, allowing us to remember it the way we remember our favorite dreams. Every rewatch feels like coming home, the clink of china at breakfast, the slow creak of the grand staircase, the soft murmur of secrets whispered in the drawing room. And through it all, Mary and Edith remain, not as rivals, not as aristocrats, but as symbols of something timeless, forgiveness that endures, love that matures, and family that, no matter how fractured, always finds its way back together. Their story echoes in more than just the show. It echoes in life, in sisters who finally understand each other after years of silence, in friends who realize they've both been fighting for the same dream all along, in anyone who's ever learned that pride is easy, but peace is what truly lasts. As the final shot of Downton glowed in golden light, you could almost hear it, the heartbeat of a story that refused to end. Because Downton Abbey was never just about the Crawleys. It was about us, our flaws, our love, our hope for second chances. And as long as we carry those lessons, the story continues, quietly, beautifully. Beyond the final frame, so even when the music fades and the credits roll, the echo of Downton remains soft, steady, eternal. A whisper that says, we were here. We loved. And that was enough. Time moves on. Curtains close and lights dim. Yet some stories refuse to fade. They linger, glowing softly in memory, like candlelight that refuses to go out. Downton Abbey is one of those stories. It didn't just entertain. It belonged to people. It became a place of comfort, a world we could return to when life felt too loud. In that world, Lady Mary and Lady Edith will forever walk those long corridors, their footsteps echoing across polished floors, their laughter drifting through golden rooms. They no longer argue as rivals, but exist as two halves of a completed story. Michelle Dockery once said, "Downton was about change and we all changed with it," Laura Carmichael added. Every goodbye inside those walls carried a piece of love with it. That's what remains, love. Wrapped in memory, framed in grace. For every viewer who watched through tears and smiles, Downton became more than fiction. It became a reminder that we all live within our own grand estates of emotion filled with mistakes, forgiveness, and the beauty of starting again. The elegance of the costumes, the charm of the dialogue, the unspoken glances, they all formed a language of their own, one that said, even the coldest hearts can learn warmth. Even the quietest souls can find strength. As the final credits roll, we don't just remember the Crawleys, we remember ourselves within them. The pride we held too tightly, the words we wished we'd said, the people we finally learned to love as they were. Downton Abbey ended. Yes, but its heart kept beating in everyone who saw a piece of their life reflected in its story. So when the screen fades to black and the music swells one last time, it isn't truly goodbye. It's a bow, gentle, timeless, filled with gratitude. A farewell that promises, in whispers and memory, we will always return. Because Downton Abbey doesn't live only in the past. It lives wherever elegance meets emotion, where pride meets grace, where two sisters, once divided, finally walk side by side into forever.